Welcome to the Chaos Sector. In today's episode, we address once again the political matrix. It has been 2 years since Biden took office, but it's almost like he's invisible. Nobody truly embraces anything coming from this administration, such as State of the Union addresses. Even the press conferences have been largely ignored by the public. For that matter, the majority of Americans have had enough with the so-called pandemic as well. It is a time of being in a limbo state, waiting for something to drastically change, for the better. There is a void energy in the country, as the so-called leader of the free world is literally lifeless as president. The vice president is maybe more catatonic, with no real impact in her role alongside Biden. But this was obviously the outcome. I wonder what the black community has to say about Biden. If you are wondering why we focus a bit more on the black community regarding politics, well, it's because the relationship that the black community has with politics exists in a very mysterious manner. Remember, it was Biden who promised so much. We examine a segment from MSNBC. Yeah, it's annoying, but we have to report on it. Our job is to listen, then break it all down, deciphering all misleading narratives, deceptive propaganda, so you can understand what is authentic and what isn't. Let's get started.
But Rev, I want to look at Joe Biden's approval rating. It has gone up from 37 to 42%. That's kind of like, as we like to say around here, it's like being the tallest building in Schenectady. It's okay, but it's not where it needs to be, and it's not where it would be if he hadn't lost so much support from black voters. So explain, why has Joe Biden lost 10, 15, 20 percentage points?
First of all, can Slickback speak for the black community as a whole? Just because he's black, does this mean he knows exactly why those black voters disapprove of Biden? Well, I guess one single black person speaks for the entire population. Sounds kinda of, what's the word? Monolithic.
From black voters in January 21 had an 87% approval rating among black adults. Now he has a 67% approval rating among black adults. And if you want to put that in context, Barack Obama never over 8 years went under 75%. If he were sitting at 75%, his approval rating would likely be closer to 44, 45%. So what's going on there?
I think that what we must put in context is that the unusually high turnout among black voters and support of black voters in 2020 was in the height of the George Floyd movement that all of us were part of, wanting to deal with policing issues, wanting to deal with how we were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And
oh, here we go. Slickback must think he's at the laundromat, because that's the spin cycle. We don't need a drawn-out summary of what occurred years prior. Address why those black voters disapprove of Biden, right now. This is classic deflection. A simple question was asked, and Slickback has to build up a narrative, for one, to justify the president as being a victim of circumstances, and another, to scapegoat those black voters for even supporting Biden after all of the crap he said about them.
How it exposed the health deserts in our communities. And all of that drove us to voting for Joe Biden and the Democratic ticket, as well as the offensive nature of the Trump presidency.
So, Trump was a key catalyst to black people voting for Biden, and now that he has taken office, those black voters are evaluating Biden's performance unaffected by the orange puppet? If you say so, let's continue.
Now that we have gotten 2 years in, and we did not get the George Floyd bill, largely because of 2 Democrats, Manchin and Sinema. We did not even get the John Lewis voting advancement bill, largely because of the same 2 with the filibuster situation. And we don't have Trump there, which is why if Elon Musk puts Trump back on Twitter, you'll start seeing a lot of black voters remembering what hostility we face.
Why is he talking about Trump so much? Scarborough asked, why is Biden's approval rating declining with black voters, and somehow Trump becomes the topic in that answer? Old Slickback never fails to amaze. It's a strategic tactic though, using Trump as the scapegoat for Biden's failures. It also magnifies how Trump in comparison did more for the black community than Biden has done up to this point. But the mainstream media will never admit this, because it exposes the truth about their narrative pushed on their network. Trump is also a puppet, entrenched in the racial war in politics, but he is so radical and outspoken, Americans enjoyed him as president. This is a fact, despite many afraid to admit it. And what hostility did black people face from Trump? He is speaking for an entire group, claiming that they faced hostility from the previous president, yet there was no proof of this claim. The truth of the matter is Trump asked a simple question to the black community: what do you have to lose? Everyone knew very well what this meant, as the black community has voted for the Democratic Party for over 60 years, and there has not been anything substantial accomplished. Trump offered an alternative, to diversify that black vote, as the Democratic support has shown to be ineffective. Even black people have acknowledged that Democrats take their votes for granted, and yet it continues to happen.
I think that the messaging on what Biden has done, and the Biden-Harris team has done some things. I mean, you can't say that what they've done in terms of dealing with the impact of the pandemic in black communities and working with black health providers and black churches and all has not been effective. It has. What they've done in terms of investments in some of our communities, in terms of what they've gotten through with infrastructure, has been good, and it has. And other things, all the way to Ketanji Brown Jackson. But I think that they have not been able to message it well, and they have not gotten trusted messengers out there. So I think that a combination of their not having the right messaging machine for what they have done.
Messaging is now the reason. If I'm not mistaken, doesn't the media do enough of this? Don't networks such as MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, and all other cable news networks in their political alliances constantly evaluate what either administration has accomplished? If there is a Democratic president, the left-wing media will report on their performance. If there is a Republican president, the right-wing media will report on their performance. And even the opposing side report on the other's performances, so you obtain the information needed to stay updated. Who the fuck do you think they are reporting those performances to? The public, the voters, millions of people who watch these networks on a daily basis. Those viewers obtain all of the information they need regarding policies, developments, and all related issues an administration is proposing or working on. The messaging, such as from a press secretary, VP, or even the president, is not what most are tuning into anyway. They are watching cable news. So messaging is just another bogus excuse, but what did we expect from slick back?
And not being realistic about the expectation of black voters is what has led to a decline. What is troubling about that is turnout. If you do not have an enthusiastic turnout in the black community, and again, you got to deal with police issues, you have to deal with voting issues. If you don't have that turnout, you will have a critical problem when it comes to what we see as the new Congress and the new Senate in the midterm elections. Turnout is going to be key in the black community.
Translation: if black people don't show up to vote for Democrats in the midterms, Republicans will regain power in the House and Senate. And, ultimately, looking to 2024, a Republican may be elected president. But who cares what political party has power, as long as the black community have their demands met? And let's flip that, slick back is alluding to Republicans literally neglecting those demands, and the Democrats would be willing to fix those problems, and this is why black voters chose the Democratic Party. That is the narrative he is painting, of course. But he contradicts himself in real time, because the very Democratic president, along with a black vice president, and Democrats holding power in the House, have not done anything promised to the black community. For example, the initial executive orders that Biden signed were for illegal immigrants, who were added to the United States Census, which is unconstitutional, climate change funding, and a bunch of pseudo-nonsense to appear effective. Another example, reparations for the black community. Biden and his administration stated they will discuss the issue of reparations. They had a meeting to discuss the topic of reparations, not a discussion about a proposal for reparations. There is a difference. And to add insult to the injury upon the black community, Biden proposed reparations to immigrants, and we know illegal immigrants are included here, for their so-called troubles, as a result of Trump's immigration laws. Wow, talk about a slap in the face. You can't debunk the claim of being monolithic, if you continue to vote for one party every year as a whole.
So, Reverend, we know Democrats often have trouble turning out voters in midterms compared to their Republican counterparts. Let's zero in on voting rights. You and I have had this conversation a lot, and we know that it became sort of an existential threat to the party. That's what Joe Biden himself said, that this was the biggest threat to the nation since the Civil War, the idea of taking away voting rights from voters, and namely Democrats, namely minorities, senior citizens, etc., in the states. We've seen the Republicans do that, backed by Donald Trump's big lie.
Once again, Donald Trump. The reason they can't stop referencing Trump is because they know what truly happened in the 2020 election. We will break that down, but what voting rights were violated? If you do not have valid identification, should you be allowed to vote? Scratch that question, here's a better one. If you do not have valid identification, who exactly are you in society? What lifestyle do you live, where identification is something you do not care to have? The only individuals who do not wish to have identification are criminals. And, also another group who has been implemented into this voting rights issue, illegal immigrants. Do black people who have identification voice any complaints about voting laws? Do black people who have identification feel that their voting rights have been violated? Well, there have been several interviews with everyday people, including black people, who all agree valid identification is required to vote. If you show up to a voting station, and you are required to provide valid identification, and do not have it, is this voter suppression? Is this a violation of your voting rights? Well, since the United States has a system of laws set in place, you do not have the right to vote if you do not have identification to do so. Now in the bizarro world, this still sounds like a violation of voting rights to some people, because they have been conditioned to think everyone has this right. If we go with this narrative, then we should eliminate all identification, such as driver's licenses, social security identification, state identification, birth certificates, everything that identifies you as a citizen of the country. Yes, laws establish a structure in society, this is not a savage land. Well, then again.
Democrats, though they've talked big, don't have anything to show for it yet. And some they have, and that's in part because of members of their own party. You and I just talked about, right around the Martin Luther King Day holiday, that there were civil rights groups who said that if they can't get something done, we're going to stay home in November. Is that what we're starting to see here?
We're starting to see that organically. It doesn't even require civil rights groups, even though some of us have won that. I think organically people are saying if we don't see something, if it's not executive orders, if it's not even more aggressive moves by the Justice Department, then what are we talking about? You said going back to the Civil War, quoting about the Civil War. After the Civil War, the big fight was whether we're going to let blacks vote.
Yep.
We're going to let them be free, but are we really going to let them vote? And we're here, over a century later with the same argument, where you are aggressively seeing people doing what they can to limit our vote and to make the impediments that would make it more difficult for us to vote put in place. And there doesn't seem to be the aggressive push on the other side with executive orders and other things that the Justice Department ought to be dramatically doing.
Unbelievable, just blatantly lying on national television. But the key here is they are allowed to lie straight to the viewers, because they are never challenged. They never appear on the opposing side's network, and that goes for the opposing side as well. Propaganda works when you are allowed to carry it out. I will just go over it again. If you have valid identification, you can place a vote. If you don't have valid identification, such as a state ID, either a social security card, driver's license, or military card, why would anyone let you vote? You would be classified as invisible. One of the reasons this is required is because if someone was allowed to vote without identification, they could place multiple ballots in the same poll station. Or even travel to another city or state and place a ballot there as well. Heck, that's already happening. If we go by slickback's propaganda, also the left's, they are suggesting that Republicans are preventing black people, who have forms of identification, from voting. Really? Has there been any evidence of this? Of course not. Want to know why this is such a major issue? Because the state of Georgia revised their voting laws, due to election fraud in that state. In State Farm's arena, there was surveillance footage of poll workers scanning ballots unattended by poll watchers or the media, which were taken from underneath tables. They told the poll watchers and the media they were done counting ballots for that day. Then when those poll watchers and media departed, this is when they pulled those suitcases from underneath the table and started scanning through the ballot machine. It's in surveillance, and to make matters worse, they are seen scanning the same ballots multiple times through the scanner. What the left, and crooked black people do, is attempt to hide these crimes, by claiming that black voters are being denied the opportunity to vote, due to, you guessed it, white supremacy. This is why LaTosha Brown came out of nowhere. They all needed to execute damage control. She founded Black Votes Matter, creating the illusion of genuinely engaged with the black community regarding politics. When it was nothing more than a ploy to distract from the 2020 voter fraud that occurred in the state of Georgia. The truth only hurts those who run from it. And now 2 years later though, members of that very group pretend to disapprove of the very person they helped become president. It appears to be working, but in reality, they are scared shitless. This is the chaos sector.